This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Adam Doyle. He is a researcher, an artist and the editor-in-chief of the Irish cultural magazine, skagmagazine.com. We're going to be speaking to Adam Doyle about the recent situation in Northern Ireland where Loyalist paramilitaries have basically written a letter saying that they no longer adhere to the Good Friday Agreement and that they might potentially resort back to violence if the Brexit sea border isn't sorted out. It's a big, complicated mess. Have a listen. If you like what we're doing, please support us at patreon.com/popularfront. So there's been last week the Loyalist paramilitaries signed this open letter to Boris Johnson basically saying we're no longer gonna recognise the Good Friday Agreement because of the border in the sea, something to do with Brexit. It's all quite confusing. What is going on? What's been said?
Yeah, the Loyalist paramilitaries. So the letter was sent by a kind of coalition of Loyalist paramilitary command or whatever. I think it was like the Loyalist Command Group or so. It was some acronym like that they've joined together under to kind of notify. They sent one to Boris Johnson in the UK, and they sent one to the Taoiseach here, Micheál Martin, essentially saying that they're going to back out of the Good Friday Agreement. And that's quite significant. It's sort of not unexpected in the sense that things have been heating up for the last few weeks. But the thing they've backed out of, the agreement they've backed out of, the Good Friday Agreement, which is also known as the Belfast Agreement, is essentially the peace deal or the treaty that's holding kind of the peace together in the north since the Troubles. So it took nearly 4 years to actually create this treaty. I think they started in 1994 and it wasn't finished until about 1998. And they did their best to sort of, when I say they, I mean the UK government, the government of the Republic of Ireland, and then there was a lot of help from the US government as well in kind of creating this settlement. And they tried to get most of the political establishment of the unionist loyalist community and their paramilitary sort of factions, and then the same for the nationalist community. They had the IRA and different groups like that sitting down, essentially trying to work out some sort of agreement by which it would end all armed conflict. So the ultimate goal of the agreement was that the groups would cease all kind of active operations against each other and against whatever the different states involved, and they'd decommission their weapons. And in return for that, there was a few things that were agreed on. So a lot of political prisoners were released from both sides. The Republic of Ireland kind of edited its constitution to remove. So they had two articles in their constitution that said essentially laid claim to the area of Northern Ireland, saying it should be part of the Republic of Ireland in our constitution. Those were removed, so that kind of relax people a little bit, that constitutional claim on the land was gone from the Republic side. And the other agreements were the reform of the police force up there. So previously you had the RUC, which was not popular with the nationalist community. It was the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and it was 90%, I think, Protestant loyalist and 10% Catholic. So obviously there was a huge kind of, it was very unbalanced in how they handled things, and there was a lot of kind of collusion and mishandling, and then kind of perceived it wasn't considered an adequate police force. So that was gotten rid of, and essentially they replaced it with the PSNI, which is the Police Service of Northern Ireland, which has it's supposed to have 50-50 recruitment. I think it does have 50-50 recruitment. It's much more or it's much more diverse in terms of like the two communities than the other one that it replaced. And then the kind of the most significant bit, I suppose, for this is that the agreement also outlined that there should be no security infrastructure along the land border. So all security infrastructure, and that means like anything from like a little checkpoint with a lad in it to like, you know, towers, barbed wire, all that stuff that had existed had to be gotten rid of. And it couldn't be there again. So there could be no hard border again. And that kind of gave people that was significant for people, especially nationalists in the north, who felt that they were disconnected from the rest of the Irish people, and they were kind of living in like the fact that the border was softened and like travel was allowed back and forth, stuff like that. That made people feel a lot better. And then other than that, the main reforms, the other main reforms of it were Stormont, the Northern Irish Parliament was kind of changed. It was given a lot more control of its own affairs, and it was there was an agreement done up where it would be kind of 50-50 between nationalists and unionists again, and new parties were formed. So the new parties were kind of the significant ones that are there now are Sinn Féin, who were previously the political wing of the Provisional IRA. So they're like the biggest Republican party. There's the SDLP, which are kind of more middle of the road nationalists. There's the DUP, which is the kind of strongest unionist loyalist party, which was founded by Ian Paisley, who was a very kind of prominent figure in the loyalist movement. And the UUP, which is the Ulster Unionist Party, which is sort of the runner-up unionist party in terms of size. And yeah, so these parties are the kind of current forces at work in Northern Ireland, and it's from the DUP that the sort of first rumblings of this sort of paramilitary reactivation kind of came from. So if you don't know about the DUP, it's the Democratic Unionist Party, and they're extremely, compared to the other parties, both in the North and in the UK, they're quite right wing. They're very socially conservative. They're very kind of anti-nationalist. Just very old school. They were founded off the principles of kind of protecting the kind of Protestant state for a Protestant people attitude that the North was kind of founded with.
Let me just say as well here, like, this isn't a biased thing in any sense. I know a lot of people listen to this and think, oh, well, you're Irish, I'm obviously of like Irish family. No, like, they are unquestionably extremely right wing. Like, the DUP, just, if you don't believe it, go and look them up. Like, some of them don't even believe in like evolution and stuff, right?
There's it's and that's why people vote for them as well. I'm not saying that like in a disparaging way, like, oh, that's why people vote for them. They want them to be socially conservative because they're protecting that kind of way of life up there. And yeah, the kind of not believing in evolution, that's maybe one or two of them, but that's the kind of very sort of creationist, nearly Christian fundamentalist element of it. Like they're very Protestant, and they're very kind of British. They love British stuff, like kind of being British, being in Britain. They don't want anything to do with the rest of the nationalist community or the Republic of Ireland, like, God forbid, that kind of thing. And yeah, so they've kind of they've characterized themselves sort of by not budging on anything really for the last 20 years. Okay, they're just trying to keep the status quo more or less as close as they can to what it was in the past. And they were heavily in favor of Brexit. So when Brexit kind of came on the scene, like came into the public sort of consciousness with all the flags and and like, I don't have an opinion, like, I'm not British, so I don't have my opinion on Brexit doesn't matter. But at the start of that whole process, there was a lot of kind of, saber rattling, flag waving, kind of talking about, you have people comparing it to World War II and that kind of rhetoric. And there was no way that the DUP and by extension the Loyalist sort of community weren't going to kind of fall for that hook, line, and sinker, because that's the kind of rhetoric and the kind of ideas that they're kind of primed to understand. Like that's quite a big part of their identity. And I think now that it's kind of ending, there's a lot of kind of confusion up there. So I'll explain a little bit what happened with Brexit. So in terms of Brexit, the idea of leaving the EU and kind of Britain becoming more British or recovering some of its lost, I don't know, imperial majesty or that kind of thing really appealed to them. But kind of what sort of ended up happening was they were sort of manipulated kind of by the Tory party. I think once I know it was a bit their own fault as well. Like Theresa May's deal, I think in 2016 she proposed like kind of a backstop Brexit where they'd have like the UK would stay for a time inside the EU customs area. And the DUP rejected that. They were like, no way, we want like, we want a proper Brexit kind of, and they were kind of falling in line with Boris Johnson in that respect. And then what ended up happening was, fast forward to like December, they were finalizing the agreement, and there was still the matter of like where the border was going to go. Now, in the real world, there was no way the border was going on the island of Ireland. There was no way they were going to create a land border between the Republic of Ireland, which is in the EU, and Northern Ireland, which is in the UK. There was no way the customs border was going there. That would be like just in itself, it would be a violation of the Good Friday agreements. No security infrastructure along the border, but it would also be just a mental thing to do in terms of as soon as that infrastructure goes up, someone's going to blow it up, and then you're going to need someone to like protect the infrastructure, and someone's going to blow them up, and like things could escalate very quickly into just shit. Like, so there was no way it was going there. And the other place it could go was the sea, which for some reason the entire kind of like run up to this, Boris Johnson had been kind of saying there's no way over my dead body, like there's no way a border is going in the sea. But like realistically, the only other place it could go was kind of the sky or something, where it wasn't going to go there. So it ended up in the sea. That's what they have now. There's been a lot of kind of weird. So like as soon as that happened, the DUP were like, damn, because now we're separated. So essentially they've got this sea border which separates. So despite being kind of within the UK's territory, Northern Ireland is inside the EU for like customs purposes. So if things are coming from, say, the mainland Britain, and they're crossing over into Ireland, into Belfast or Larne or whatever, those goods have to be checked. This is causing delays, and symbolically also, it's kind of cut the north from. It's cut Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK, and it's kind of it made them kind of outside of the gang of the rest of the groups in the UK, so or the nations in the UK. So this has caused like absolute mayhem. So the DUP are like railing against this, and I feel like they were kind of being ignored or kind of like blown off a bit by Boris Johnson in terms of he was talking shit about like, oh, we're going to build like a bridge that goes all the way across last year, which they're not going to do. And then he was talking about like this really vague kind of electronic border that they could have on the land in between the Republic, like that. We didn't expand on it any more than that, so that was kind of just nonsense as well. And then most recently he was talking about building a tunnel under the sea between like, and just none of these things are going to happen. So essentially kind of what he was getting around to saying was that the sea border it's just there and kind of deal with it. So they're feeling quite betrayed now by the Conservative Party in the UK, by Boris Johnson's party. They're feeling like they've kind of been left out in the cold. So for the last few weeks, things have kind of really been heating up in terms of the DUP's kind of rhetoric around this. So
Yeah, the last I read, there was some guy that from the DUP, I believe, basically said like, we need to resort to guerrilla warfare, and then said, "Oh no, I didn't mean actual guerrilla warfare. It was a metaphor or some bullshit." Right? That was a part of this whole kind of rhetoric ramping up, right?
yeah, so that was Sammy Wilson, who is a DUP politician, and he essentially called for, exactly like you said, guerrilla warfare against the protocol, or the sea border and the Northern Ireland Protocol, which has created it. And maybe in like another place, in another country, like I don't know, maybe even the mainland UK, that'd be fine. You know what I mean? Like you could say that, people would understand what you meant. But he's kind of in the context of the North, which has come out of a 30-year violent guerrilla war, and it's been looming over them ever since. It's obviously not a metaphor. He knew exactly what he was kind of thought he was being witty or smart or something like that. But like saying something like that in a place like that it's kind of as smart as like setting off fireworks in the airport or something. Like you kind of might think it's funny until shit goes south. And that's kind of what he's done. In terms of that was a couple days before things started really ramping up, but you could kind of tell then that he was saying that on purpose. He was saying, he was playing it off like, oh yeah, it's a metaphor, it's just, I'm just like passionate about this or whatever. But he was appealing to this kind of paramilitary element of the Loyalist community and kind of asking them to kind of step in. And then when the letter went out, that's exactly what happened. So essentially these Loyalist paramilitaries backed out. The kind of conditions that they gave were that I think it was three. So it was Loyalist Communities Council that actually sent the letter.
They've sent one to Ireland, one to England. What are they actually saying in the letter?
They're in the letter. They're saying essentially like they want the Northern Ireland Protocol to be completely scrapped. So they want this border in the sea, essentially the kind of stuff that's underpinning the Brexit deal. They want it scrapped. They're sort of framing it as the EU. It's like somehow the EU is occupying, like, as opposed to like, this is the deal that Boris Johnson signed. You know what I mean? This is a deal that he made. Theresa May had offered an alternative deal. Nobody wanted it. This is the deal that they've ended up with. This is the deal that, Boris Johnson kind of was sort of saying was a success. And there's no way that there's no way that the protocol is going to be scrapped. There's not a chance. Like, unless they want to go back to renegotiating the whole thing. So essentially, this is sort of just a tantrum. But what the letter actually says is, if the EU is not kind of prepared to honor the entirety of the Good Friday agreements, then they will be responsible for the permanent destruction of the agreement. Now, that's kind of twisting the truth a little bit, because there isn't anything in the Good Friday Agreement that says anything about not having a border in the sea. But they're kind of adamant that it will be the EU's fault if the Good Friday Agreement is destroyed. And by destroying the Good Friday Agreement, they 100% mean violence, unless they're going to get up and start building a hard border, which I'd say is less likely than them kind of returning the violence. So that's at the moment, it's not a serious threat. Like, this isn't like they're going to be out tomorrow attacking things, but it's certainly a step in the wrong direction. And the Loyalist paramilitaries in question, they're very large, especially compared to like the Republican groups. 12,500 people are currently members of Loyalist paramilitaries. Quite a significant amount of people. Like, and for context, that's a big organization on the island of Ireland. Like, for context, the Irish Army itself has about 7,300 members in it. So like having an organization with 12,500 members or active members, that's quite significant.
12.5 members on paper is not 12,500 people with firearms or explosives. From that 12.5, most of them are probably not ever going to do anything. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. But it only takes a handful of people to create quite a lot of mayhem, especially like what they've been doing. So what they've been, this is more alleged than proven, but what they've been alleged to have been doing was going to the customs border. So I think there's a customs area in Larne. So when the trucks are stuff crosses over, there's people there and they're checking the trucks and stuff like that. And that's essentially an EU customs border. So they've gone down there, photographed the registration plates of people working there, people like involved, collecting information on them, and then leaving graffiti around the place saying like that the staff essentially at these port facilities are they're legitimate targets essentially. And that's not like proven, like the graffiti is there, and there is reports of that happening, and I've definitely heard quite a bit from like pretty reputable sources that there is sort of this ramping up in sort of surveillance and preparation, especially like kind of organizing on encrypted messaging apps and stuff. So like as you say, obviously 12,500, they're not all gonna like, you know, take to the streets, but what might happen, and certainly a good indicator, is that as the kind of dissatisfaction grows, you have this large organization, and then as the COVID lockdown eases, as people kind of get back out and about and stuff like that, you could see large scale kind of street demonstrations, stuff like that, and then that could turn into rioting, that could go quite south, that could turn into violence. And it doesn't take much in terms of like provoking a response as well. Like if there's, because the way it's been framed currently, like realistically, their enemy isn't the EU or Dublin or, you know, Republicans, or like none of that is relevant in this current thing. It's kind of between them and London, but by the nature of their ideology, I don't think they're going to be able to figure that one out. Like in terms of just in terms of there isn't much of a way to direct like loyalist pro-British sentiment against London.
This is what we were speaking about the other day. Like I was saying kind of jokingly, what they're going to do, attack the sea. But like really, who are they going to fucking attack? So they're obviously very, very pro-England, pro-empire, all of that. They're loyalists, you know, they want to stay a part of England or a part of the UK. And at the same time, they're, you know, kind of political representatives, although to be fair, a lot of the unionist community don't really like the DUP for whatever reason. But they're, you know, for the sake of argument, their political representatives in Northern Ireland were very pro-Brexit. Now they've got Brexit. Now they don't like the fact that there's a border kind of in the sea which separates their part of Northern Ireland from Britain, right? So, you know, it's a bit of a tricky one. What are they going to do? They're not going to attack British troops. They're not going to attack the PSNI. Probably not. I mean, maybe. But the way I see it, if this does get out of hand, I think they'll just go, all right, fuck it then. We'll just attack the Republicans again, because they've said, okay, we'll destroy the Good Friday Agreement. So now what do? Well, you know, we'll go and start the war again. We'll start it with the Republicans. You know, that's not exactly their main target, but it's how they get attention. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it essentially just could end in a violent kind of tantrum situation, and
yeah.
the danger, like this kind of thinking of you can kind of see it. It's kind of this like kind of nearly like QAnon-esque sort of thinking, where like it's not just, you know, everything goes back to the Republicans. You know what I mean? They're like the kind of hand behind everything, like controlling things. So like this isn't just a fuck up, like in terms of UK internal policy. It's, you know, the Republicans and the EU are like conspiring together to kind of, you know, and they got like, so there's definitely a chance. I'd say the most likely target will be that infrastructure at the port. I'd say they'll just, if they're going to do anything, they're going to go and either shoot someone there or blow it up, or something like that, and that would be bad, and that'd just that could accelerate the situation into like extremely dangerous territory. Like, and what you're saying about like the DUP is kind of, they're going out on a limb here in terms of they represent, or they claim to represent, the unionist loyalist kind of section of society in Northern Ireland. So that's about 50% of people. 50% of people in the north don't have anything to do with paramilitaries or any of this. Like, people have businesses, they have like they have to get up in the morning, go to work. They're wondering like, when are they going to get back to work? Like, is it going to be hard to like import things from a business? Can I export things? That kind of, they don't want to hear their elected representatives flirting with like paramilitary. Like, essentially the DUP is using the threat of paramilitary violence as kind of a club to kind of elicit the response they want from the UK government and the EU. They want to kind of create a scene and be like, kind of, listen to us, we want this, like, and as you say, they're kind of asking to have their cake and eat it too. And I think this is going to lead to a lot of disillusionment with them inside the loyalist community, because people are going to recognize that not only did they push for this Brexit, kind of blindly pushed for it, but once it was delivered, they kind of like pretended that there was nothing to do with them. Like, it's going to, what the hell happened? Like, they knew that was going to happen. They knew that was going to happen as soon as it was proposed, because the other factor and the reason that London isn't going to budge on it is the United States. Joe Biden and like a lot of people in Joe Biden's White House, they had quite a substantial input on the actual Good Friday Agreement and the peace process, and putting that all together. And they've kind of said firmly to London that if the Good Friday Agreement is put in danger, there's going to be like serious difficulty getting a trade agreement signed with the United States after, like, now that Britain has left the EU. So that's kind of being held over them. There's no way it's gonna, they're gonna get what they want. But the danger here, I suppose, is that ultimately it's not going to be the DUP or the MLAs that are saying this, the politicians that are saying this, that guess they're not going to do anything. It's going to be working class young people that are either going to end up in jail for the rest of their lives. They're going to end up getting killed. They're going to end up killing someone else. And this is kind of like really unethical way of dealing with this problem. Like, it's just amping up tensions in an area where there's already like really high tension. And like the other thing is that this is exactly what, like, they are right in the sense that this is what like kind of Republicans want. Like, all Republicans have to do is just kind of keep their powder dry and watch this all unfold, because they haven't really got a dog in this fight. It's between London and Belfast. But ultimately it's put a lot of distance between Belfast and the rest of the UK, and that's what people want. And if the DUP continues kind of this trajectory of just like appealing to paramilitaries, appealing to kind of these non-state actors, and ignoring their constituents, or at least ignoring any like kind of like, it's not constructive. Do you know what I mean? It's not constructive to be going on to paramilitaries and encouraging them, or like saying things about guerrilla war. Like, people don't want to hear that. People want to hear like actual semi-solid like plans, or maybe like a plan about moving forward, or like what's going to happen with my business, or like what's things going to be like at the end of the year. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear their politicians essentially calling for political unrest, because that's not really gonna help at all. It's just not constructive dialogue at all. Like,
yeah, I agree. And I think you've hit the nail on the head talking about kind of the younger generation, specifically the working class in places like Shankill, etc., the kind of loyalist stronghold, if you like. I've been to Shankill, and I certainly don't agree with the loyalists, and they have a huge problem with the far right there. But the point is, even context wise, like even the kind of young people that go there and say fuck the Pope and burn an Irish tricolour, even them generally don't actually want a war. You know, I think there's a lot of this people that don't know a lot about Northern Ireland, or specifically a lot of Americans that are kind of romantic about the Troubles, don't seem to realize that actually, you know, even outwardly militant people don't actually want to go back to the war. And in the Republican community, certainly people don't want it. We saw it when, you know, the so-called new IRA killed Leroy McKee, and basically the whole community came out and said, stop fucking shooting people. Like, violence is not the way. We don't want it. However, to get to my point, I think that whilst, you know, the rest of, you know, standard Irish Republicans are kind of like, yeah, okay, let the Unionists and the Loyalists fight amongst each other. I do think that the, you know, for want of a better word, the kind of Irish Republican dissidents, the guys that do still want to cause violence for whatever ideas they have, I think for them, they quite like this happening in terms of a violent perspective, because, you know, they're edging to go back to war. They've been shooting at police. You know, what, 3 years ago, they detonated quite a large car bomb. You know, it's not that unusual that they're kneecapping still. So I don't know. What do you think about that? The fact that maybe the Irish Republican dissidents are quite enjoying this happening, but they don't want to keep their powder dry, as you say. They might actually want to engage with this violence if it starts.
Well, yeah, like there's gonna be for sure when street demonstrations start. Like I feel like you could be fairly confident that like street violence is gonna break out. And the way like places like Belfast are structured, where you have like, you know, on one side of the road you have one community, say like a Republican community or a nationalist community, and then on the other side you have a Protestant community. It'll more than likely start with like interface violence. So like the place where those two communities meet, people will like start scrapping each other, like things will start being thrown, marches will, you know, it'll be quite hard to control. And there's definitely a propensity for sectarian attacks within that kind of process. Like if people start fighting kind of in a non like organized fashion on the streets, there's definitely a propensity for like people who, yeah, like you said, want to war. Like there's that'll be like a field day for them potentially, like if it gets out of control. The other thing as well, I imagine Irish Republican dissidents are waiting on is to see if, so like the alternative to this sea border and this infrastructure there is on the actual border. Like, so any move towards that, or any kind of walking it back that the EU and the EU and the UK do to walk back this like thing where maybe, okay, well, maybe we could try put some infrastructure on the, I don't know what they do, but like anything that's going to like start to threaten a hard border or kind of threaten a united Ireland, then that's when they're going to jump in. They're waiting in the wings for that to deliver the exact same kind of threats and violence that the Loyalist paramilitaries are delivering now. Just when it's their patch that's kind of being threatened.
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately, I think that would, in some ways, legitimize the dissidents. Now, you know, I'm absolutely no fan of them, as most people in Northern Ireland aren't. People don't want to see more violence. You know, it's been proven that you don't need more explosive guerrilla violence to kind of free up the rest of the counties, or however you want to see it. But, you know, if they do then actually build some infrastructure, you know, dissidents like them or not, then it can be then seen as a legitimate target in a way, because that would go against the Good Friday Agreement anyway, right? So whilst I don't think that like, oh, this is really, really terrible, this is crazy, all war is going to break out, like you were saying at the start, this does look like the potential of like the very kind of bad start to the crumbling of the Good Friday Agreement on any side. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, it's way closer to like people are kind of, I noticed that the PSNI are kind of like talking it down. They're kind of saying like, oh yeah, well, they don't really mean like, you know, they're gonna do, but they're paramilitaries, like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of like a hammer and nails situation. Like, they're once these organizations kind of get going and start making moves and stuff, they're realistically going to be violent. Like at the moment, you're like at the precipice, I guess, of like, I'm not saying it'd be full scale war, but like it could start kind of sliding kind of slowly into shit like similar infrastructure along the sea border. Then like people are gonna have to defend that. You know, the police are gonna have to be there. Like if say someone plants a bomb down there or shoots at it or you know that kind of thing, the police are going to have to be there the next day, and then you know it just takes a little bit more for like one of the police officers to get hurt, and then the army's there, and then you can see the kind of trajectory where it could actually become quite a serious fight. And also actually the DUP, I can't remember his name, the agriculture minister for the DUP essentially was put in charge of building permanent infrastructure along that sea border. And he's kind of said, I'm not doing that anymore. So they're really hammering home this idea that they don't want the sea border anymore, even though it's what they're going to get. So what I can see is this could be, they can either kind of dial it back a little bit, kind of realize, kind of like look around the room and see like people aren't really, it's not the 1970s. It's not like people don't want to hear. I feel like the vast majority of people don't want to hear that, like, you know, paramilitaries are getting up in arms. They don't, like, as you said, it's not a romantic kind of thing. Like I think what a lot of people see from the outside is nearly this sort of like or they have this kind of like football team opinion of it, like kind of, oh, I like these guys or I like these guys, and they're like, you know, they fight each other, and like you know, I'm related to someone who's Irish, so I'm on their side, or I'm like English, so I like the yeah, whatever. Like, but like I know, especially like even from talking to people in my own family, like talking to like my ma, or like it's not looked on as like, you know, that was a great patriotic struggle. Like it's looked on as like that was really dark, like literally for that whole, like my ma's whole life growing up, say every night on the TV would have been bombings and shootings, and like it just like people are fatigued of it. Like obviously there's the political intention is still there, either to create like a separate Northern Irish state within Britain or to create a united Ireland. The political intention is definitely still there, but I think the will for violence isn't there in the same quantity that it was, say, in the 1960s, and the stakes are a lot less high in terms of there is kind of universal civil rights. There's a lot of problems, but they're like a lot of the problems can be kind of dealt with sort of in a cross community kind of way, like unemployment or poverty or that kind of stuff. That's not a sectarian issue. So like a lot of this stuff, yeah, there isn't the will there for this kind of conflict, I think, anymore. I think people just kind of want to get on with it.
Yeah. Has there been any response from the Republican paramilitaries? I know there's, you know, a whole sea of them at the moment, very kind of disjointed and then also connected in other ways. But generally they do release kind of joint statements around things like this. Has there been anything from them yet?
I haven't seen it, and I would imagine they're laughing all the way to Leeds. Like, I wouldn't say like at the moment this is like this is sort of like, it's not funny, but I can definitely see that it's kind of like, this is just bizarre. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's got to the stage like the Republicans have had they don't have a dog in this fight. Essentially, this is like to do with like customs borders and like the UK and what the fucking Westminster has agreed, like stuff that they've signed. Like, it's nothing to do with so I can't see anybody really weighing in on it. Like, even I actually haven't seen any nationalist politicians even weigh in on the fact that the Loyalists have put. It's just kind of like,
yeah, I don't want to like take the piss out of them or anything, but it does remind me of the kind of that Spider-Man meme where, you know, it's two Spider-Man pointing at each other, because it's like, you know, you voted for this and now you got it, you know, and they don't like the implementation of it. However, I will say, like, you know, as a Brit specifically over here, we hear nothing about this. You know, we hear nothing about Northern Ireland. We're completely in the dark. I mean, I only know about Irish, you know, struggles and that just because of my granddad and that. You know, otherwise you don't learn about it in school. You hear nothing. And I do think that the British government has, you know, largely completely been ignoring their unionist community. I mean, like them or not, the British government should be looking after them. You know, I remember when I was there. I mean, we're talking like fucking 6-7 years ago, and people were saying like, "Fuck the British government, they don't care about us." And honestly, I don't think anything has changed. You know what I mean? I can kind of see why they're pissed off outside of just the sea border thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, this is just the latest in them kind of being second best to the rest of the UK in terms of, like, I'm pretty sure I'm not pretty sure. I'm definitely sure that the Northern Ireland as a whole is the most impoverished area of the UK. The all of the violence recently, previously, it would have been political violence, but there's kind of an upward trend in violence in the last few years, and that's more to do with poverty and underattainment in education and the kind of lack of support facilities, all that kind of stuff. So for a good while now, London hasn't gave a fuck really about Belfast or Northern Ireland. It's kind of like they're subsidizing it. They don't really want it. It's such a small voter base as well. Compared to the rest of the UK, there's only 1.5 million people in the north. Do you know what I mean? So if you're someone like Boris Johnson or you're a policymaker in London, it doesn't really cross your mind that you can kind of tip the hat at them, which I feel they do. They're kind of oh yeah, we're unionists too, kind of whatever, but they don't actually care in terms of getting votes and stuff like that. It's just a non-entity. The only time they kind of buddied up to them recently was just to get support in Parliament, and now they've kind of ditched them again. Nobody wants to be friends with the DUP. Sinn Féin doesn't actually sit in the Westminster Parliament in London. They don't recognise that Parliament as somewhere they should be involved with. They're an All Ireland political party, and yeah, times are kind of changing as well. In terms of, there's a lot more because of that Good Friday Agreement and all the advances that have been made. There's a lot more cross border. A good example is dairy. So the way dairy works now is the actual milk is produced on farms in the north, but then it's put on a truck and brought to the south, sent to a creamery or a dairy plant, made into milk, and then sent back over the border to be either sold in the north or exported to the UK. And that's there's a lot of industries like that are now because they were taking advantage of this kind of just this porous border between the north and the south. There's a lot of people who have built a livelihood or a career. There's a lot of people employing people based off stuff that goes back and forth across that border every day. It's kind of it's definitely, the lay of the land has definitely changed a lot. And I think this kind of lashing out and kind of dramatic stuff is definitely a sign that the DUP is completely out of step with the rest of there's obviously there's gonna be violence and paramilitaries and stuff, especially in impoverished communities, communities that don't have a lot going for them. But in the kind of more middle class or rural population, there's a lot more recently there's a lot more interaction with the south. And also another thing, back in the 70s, the Irish state was very much controlled by the church. It was very kind of verging on kind of an authoritarian sort of theocratic regime in the south, and it was Catholic and was very hostile to Protestants, not in a violent way, but definitely hostile to that kind of ideology. And people in the north were fucking terrified of, if you're a Protestant in the north, the last place you want to be is the United Ireland, because you got the bishops have so much power, and you'd be worried that your way of life is going to be completely destroyed. Whereas now there probably isn't that much actual difference between someone, say a student in Queen's College in Belfast and a student in UCD. There's not a huge kind of lifestyle difference. Religion definitely doesn't play into it that much anymore, or at all, really. There's obviously, it's a good way of distinguishing the two communities. But other than that, there isn't actually any major religious concerns. The South is a lot more liberal now than it was, a lot more kind of progressive in terms of just there isn't as much like religious control. And now the North, which was previously kind of the more progressive in like the 60s, is now kind of lagging behind. I feel like people are getting maybe a bit sick of. There's definitely a portion of the loyalist community who's definitely sick of the DUP and them kind of dragging their feet and not kind of like they're not a party that produces any sort of new ideas, if you get me. Like they're still using the kind of the old tricks kind of from the Troubles era, and they're not willing to budge on any of their policy or ideology. So I feel like they're going to lose a lot of traction now after this.
Yeah, and I think, taking all that into account, the fact that this DUP guy literally came out and said, yeah, we'll have guerrilla warfare over this, and then, oh no, I didn't mean physical guerrilla warfare, which obviously he did. Like, it's so out of whack with, I mean, look, here's a good example, right? I probably mentioned this before, but it always made me smile. Being on both, in the Ardoyne, the Irish Republican parts of Belfast, and then being on the Shankill, in the Loyalist areas, on both sides, I saw the graffiti FAP, right? Fuck all paramilitaries. And I came to understand it's basically just like young kids that just want to fucking get high and, mess around and don't want to be beaten up or shot by paramilitaries for it. And, when you've got the youth in the council estate spraying that on the walls, and then you've got a fucking member of parliament for the DUP saying, yeah, we'll restart guerrilla warfare, basically. Oh no, not physical guerrilla warfare. Like, even between them and the people, I know they're weird examples, but I do think it's relevant, you know what I mean? It just seems so backwards for them to be pushing this, And they must have known that this letter was coming, They must have known that letter was coming.
Yeah, well, it'd be a funny coincidence now that he's kind of said guerrilla war, and then all of a sudden the loyalist paramilitaries weigh in. Like
a very big coincidence, yeah.
Like, yeah, and like as well, that like Sammy Wilson fella, like he's not going to be, he's not going to be driving around his car with a fucking AK-47, like, sorting people out. Like it's going to be those young people from council estates, and they're the ones that are going to end up. I said it already, but they're the ones that are going to be affected by this. And it's a bit sickening. It's a bit kind of like, oh no, a bit of a World War I kind of buzz or something. Like it's like calling on these young people to sort of fight. Like, why you have the political assembly there? You have, do it. You're a politician. Do your job. Don't ask, working class youths and criminal fucking organizations to do your work for you. Do you know what I mean? And like that's what they are. That's what loyalist paramilitaries are now. Like, do you know what I mean? They're not the troubles are over. They're mostly involved in drug trafficking, arms trafficking. I wouldn't be surprised if they were like in all ways linked up with criminal syndicates in the south, that kind of thing. The fact that a politician is like appealing to these people is a bit mental. Like it's a bit like I don't know. It's just a bit mad. Like it's a criminal organization. Do you know what I mean? It's not like,
yeah, it's the same on both sides, to be honest. I mean, even when you see Republicans kneecapping drug dealers, it's funny how they always do the guy that's got like a few baggies. It's never the fucking kingpins they go after.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's what all these organizations are now. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no war. Like there's no reason to have paramilitary, and these are like people who are like retaining the same like raw kind of military power or like paramilitary power, but without any of the actual like objectives, or they have a lot of guns, they have a lot of power in their communities, they still hold a lot of sway, and they can get things done kind of under the table, and they're already organized, like, so they can make a lot of money doing it. And actually, like there's been a couple of recent videos, like even just like kind of show a strength videos, like of just I think it was the UDA or the UVF, I can't remember which one it was, but there was essentially like, it was a video about 50 or 60 boys like just walking through an estate like on their way to do something, like, and the police just kind of not knowing what to do. Like they had like 5 or 6 police there, like just standing there, like that kind of thing. And that's sort of like a show of strength, or I guess a show of numbers, all these masked kind of men walking through an estate. And then there's been a couple of kind of attacks mainly against members of their own community, either shootings or beatings or murders or that kind of thing, and they're mainly over deaths or what would you call it? Like just kind of political, or not political, personal vendettas, or someone fucking mouted off to you in the pub.
Yeah, or smashing up immigrants' houses, as a lot of the loyalist paramilitaries do now, spraying fucking swastikas on the side of them, which is well documented. I just want to go over again. So it is quite complicated. So let's just to reiterate. So basically, the loyalist paramilitaries in Northern Ireland have come together and have released a statement to Boris Johnson and to the Taoiseach in Ireland saying. They're saying they don't want the border in the sea, right? That's it, because that would then separate their part of Northern Ireland, or what they see as their part of Northern Ireland, from England. That's what they're saying, right? And if what? I mean, this is really tricky because it's not a physical border, right? In the sea, it's not a physical border, so it can't be removed as such. But like, what, they wanted to stop using it, or what?
They want, they essentially just, sorry, I don't ultimately know what they can do. They can hear this would have been like, if they could have like gone into the future in like 2016 and like recorded all of this stuff and brought it back, this would have been the best Remain ad, like, for Brexit. That like, it just like what they want is no, like they want no border, like they want no difference between the UK and their area, and they can't have a hard border. So the only other actual option that they have, like the only option they had, like to like get all these things they wanted, would have actually been to not leave the EU, or then the second thing is not to torpedo Theresa May's backstop. They did both of those things, and now they're out. And they're upset that there's this border. It's not going to go anywhere else. It can't go on the land. There's no hard border. That would actually be in violation of the Good Friday Agreement. And the United States have said pretty, firmly that, they're not going to give a trade deal to the UK if that's violated at all. So Boris Johnson isn't going to touch that. He doesn't care. There's only 1.5 million of them, so they're kind of like, they're up shit creek without a paddle. And it's unfortunate. It's definitely, like, I understand where they're coming from. They've been cut off, and it's, as you said before, it's not the first time that this kind of, they've just been neglected. The unionist community is often just an afterthought, and now it's gotten to a stage where this is like really threatening their existence, kind of, because if they're not in the UK and they're unionists, you know what I mean. And that's kind of, they seem to be edging closer to that kind of scenario.
Right, and something that we should have mentioned as well, or I should have mentioned, is the reason for the different borders now, because of Brexit, which you already mentioned this, but just to be clear again, the reason for the different borders is because of Brexit. England, the United Kingdom, is out of the EU. Ireland is still in the EU, so there's two different trade unions, right?
Yeah, so like all the goods inside the EU are inside all the goods move around kind of freely. There's not as much, there's no checks, there's no tariffs, there's none of that shit, because they're all in the customs union together. And Britain was in there until this December 20 something, and then they left, and now they're not in it, and this is causing shit now, because either you could have this, because like the goods now, if they come from the UK, they have to be checked. They have to, it has to make sure, they have to make sure that they line up with EU standards. And that is quite a bureaucratic process. Like, they have to stop the truck, they have to go through, what have you got in here? Frozen pizzas. Okay, what are the ingredients? We have to go back and look in the system. Is this all okay? That kind of shit. And then you're standing there for like 7 hours. And that's just like kind of making it seem unappealing, but it's also like there is effectively a border there in the sea, and the people in the north, like the Loyalist unionist community, don't want that, but the border can't go on the land.
Right, and before there wouldn't have been the checks because we were already in the EU, so it was already accepted that. Yeah, free trade. Man, what a fucking mess. I mean, honestly, I'm no fan of the EU at all. I think it's quite a corrupt institution. But honestly, I think for the moment, we would have just been better just staying in, Like, what a mess. If we'd have had a government that would have actually gave a shit about Northern Ireland, like, maybe, like, it would have gone better. But the fact that they just seemingly kind of ignored it is just madness to me. One thing I'm thinking of though that would really, I think, would be more realistic of what would happen if the Unionists and the Loyalists, paramilitaries, do actually start employing violence again against this. MI5, I think, would just absolutely scoop everybody up, because you mentioned that it could scupper the US trade deal between England, right? There is no way London will give a shit about just getting everyone locked up from the Loyalist paramilitaries, just to stop them messing that up. You know what I mean? And I mean, I think it's fair to say that MI5 are pretty much crawling all over Northern Ireland, have been for a while, right?
That could happen. Like they could decide that, you know, this is kind of fucking up our chances of getting the trade deal or whatever, and they could send in, you know, security forces or intelligence services and kind of nip this shit in the bud. Or they could kind of employ the tactic that they have been so far, which is sort of just kicking the can down the road, in terms of like they can leave it there, let it happen, let it get a little bit bad, use it as kind of a bargaining chip against, say, the EU, or like a propaganda tool against the EU, and kind of, or even a bit against the US. Say, look, we did what you said, we didn't touch the border on the land, and we did this, and now it's gone to shit anyway. So that kind of like, I'm not sure how, like what you said, yeah, like realistically you would expect the government to do, like that would be the best response, would be to stop like any sort of terrorism or like paramilitary violence, using, you know, whatever apparatus you have there to do that. But judging by the kind of weird performance of Boris Johnson's government, I would be skeptical that they'd take like that kind of direct an approach, like especially seeing as he's talking about, like, you know, building tunnels under the sea and that kind of thing. Like it'd be surprising if he just had this like very on the ball approach to domestic terrorism, but I suppose you have to wait and see. Like
I think deep down he's got a deep authoritarian streak to him. I almost think he wants to unleash it on some way that will be not too kind of contested in the mainland, you know, which, because honestly, if that all happened, like, no one would give a shit here. Like, no one here, not most, but a lot of Brits think that Ireland is unified, you know, like they don't even realize the situation is ongoing still. So I don't think that anyone would turn an eye to it. Having said that, I've just thought about that. I'm going to contradict myself now. I guess if they did do that, it would actually act as a kind of big recruitment tool for more people, you know, to the Loyalist paramilitaries. If suddenly dad and brother is arrested, I think a lot of people might go, hang on, what the fuck? Like, you know, okay, we'll join up now.
Potentially, or it could be like a massive kick in the balls, like in terms of like, you know, we're the Loyalist paramilitary, and all of a sudden we're, you know, enemies of the state and opinion of the place that we're loyalists of. That kind of thing. It could be a serious like demotivator, like if it's reacted to like that. But that's all kind of speculation. Like ultimately, please God, they kind of walk this back. The DUP need to stop. They really need to stop stirring shit in the like once that genie's out of the bottle, do you know what I mean? Like it's all well and good that the DUP are saying this and saying that and, you know, saber rattling, but like ultimately they have no control over any of these groups. And once it kind of becomes once it gets out of hand, then it's you know, it took 30 years the last time. I'm not saying it's going to be as bad or like it will get as out of hand as it did, but like it took 30 years to stop the last conflict. It took a fucking 8 years or 4 years to do the treaty, to like figure it out, and they had to completely reorganize the country and stuff. Like, so like kind of advocating for, you know, any sort of return to that situation is a bit like, it's just irresponsible and dangerous and stupid, and they ultimately should stop and kind of take responsibility. Like, just like, not even saying that they should like come up with some like cool like genius solution to the whole problem. Like, oh, you can't really think of a way to solve it. I think they've kind of made their bed and now they're sleeping in it in that sense. But it would be nice to have them not sort of leading their communities or betraying their communities and kind of just risking violence. And because like those port workers as well, like the people that are probably going to get targeted, like the people who are working in all this customs infrastructure, they're not, you know, they're calling them like EU people. They're not from fucking France, you know what I mean? Like they're probably from down the road. Like they're probably also DUP constituents, or, you know, citizens that they're supposed to represent. So like kind of advocating this violence that is going to lead to like any of your constituents getting hurt or any of the people you're supposed to be representing. And I think that what will ultimately happen is the DUP will attempt to do a massive kind of tantrum and just completely crash the Northern Ireland Assembly, just like completely stall it and kind of throw all of their toys, even their like legislative ability, just throw it all out of the pram until, you know, something changes.
Well, yeah, last time they did that, it was very suitable for both sides. Sinn Féin and DUP, like everybody still got paid, whilst there was no government convening. You know what I mean? So they don't give a shit.
Yeah, for sure. And like that took 3 years to stop last time. Like
one thing I have read is that certain people from you just mentioned the people at the port there. I was reading that there are some employees have like quit their jobs already just because they were getting threats and they were like, right, it's not fucking worth it. Like that alone,
blame them, man.
Yeah, no, I know, right? I know, but that alone is like fucking terrible.
Yeah, it's fucked up. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Like, and I feel like it's on pretty good authority that those like they're collecting, you know, intelligence, surveillance targets, and they've made it like it's not just in the north as well. They've kind of taken this position that the government in the south is a target. For some reason, they don't mention our current Taoiseach is so people who don't know, Ireland's Prime Minister is Taoiseach. That's the term that we use. But the current Taoiseach is Micheál Martin, and but there's been a lot of kind of threats and graffiti and anger directed towards the previous Taoiseach, which was Leo Varadkar, and he's kind of been singled out as sort of a target or an instigator, for some reason, kind of more so than the new one. And he, yeah, exactly. Like, so like, it could lead to violence against those people. It could lead to violence against like people in the south. But I'd imagine, the first people that are going to get it are just the people who are clocking in and working at those port kind of installations or the customs installations, and then it'll just snowball from there into absolute shit if people don't get a handle on it.
Yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen. Is there anything else you want to mention before we go?
No, I think we covered that pretty well. Like, there's no point in like, I don't want this to be like alarmist in any way. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, please God, nothing does happen, because like, as you said, it might be kind of fun to root for one side or the other from abroad, but it's not fun for the people, you know, that are fucking getting hurt. Like, it's there's no need for it to happen. It's a completely like mental situation. Like, if you had to tell me this was gonna happen 2 years ago, I would tell you were joking. Like, you know what I mean? It's just really weird, and it's even worse that, you know, these politicians are kind of egging it on, and you know, you'd want them to stop.
I would echo that as well. Like, we're not saying the war is about to start, but you know, this is a bad thing. So keep your eyes on it. It's like when people were asking me, was this a big deal? I said, it's big and it isn't. It is and it isn't. You know, like, but it's not good, that's for sure. But one thing that does annoy me, like, no offense to Americans, but there are a lot of like, you know, Irish diaspora or third, second generation, whatever, in America. I saw them online being like, oh, up the rah, the war has started again. And it's like, well, you know, that's all very well to kind of cheer like that as if it's a football game, but, you know, burning flesh and brains hanging out of skulls and legs blown off of bodies and that, it's not funny, and it's not ooh-ah, it's fucking horrible.
It's not a war in the sense that, like, you know, these two groups of lads are going to turn up and have, like, you know, fucking flags and drums and stand in front of each other. Like, it's going to be like bombs going off sorry, no, it's not going to be, but like what it was previously was bombs going off in like shopping centers, like, you know, shit, people just getting killed, like people getting shot for like their identity more than like there was a lot more civilians getting killed than like, it's not a war, like a war. It's like a whatever you call it, like a insurgency, like it's not a clean war, like it's
urban
combat. A lot of people, yeah, exactly, a lot of people get hurt, a lot of like targets are hit that are like completely civilian targets, people that want nothing to do with it. It's not funny. It's not like it's not something you should be rooting for, really. Like, ideally they'll avoid that. They have the political tools in place now that they didn't have the first time round, so they have the political tools there to at least, kind of get past this shit. And hopefully they use those tools and they do that rather than any sort of return to violence, because that would not be fun or cool in any sense.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Adam, where can people find your work? I know you have your own publication, Skag Magazine, designer, all of that. Tell people where they can, see your work.
So skagmagazine.com is kind of a news blog, or like a media kind of thing that we have going for like kind of independent Irish media. So if you have any interest in that, it's skagmagazine.com, SKAG magazine.com, and then you can find me on Instagram at spicebag.exe. Yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
That was Adam Doyle, also known as Spice Bag. He was talking about the weird situation in Northern Ireland right now, where the Loyalists have recently said that they no longer recognise the Good Friday Agreement, and consequently will start a war again if their needs aren't met, or at least that's what they've kind of been saying. Let's keep an eye on it. Hopefully that doesn't happen. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. Or if you don't like Patreon, it's a weird, buggy platform. I don't blame you. Some people don't like it. Go to popularfront.co/support. But generally, the Patreon is the best way to get benefits for the subscription. So you get bonus episodes, at least 2 a month, access to the community Discord, narrated articles. There's a whole series telling people how to be a reporter without having to go to J school. Loads of stuff there. Definitely check it out. Patreon.com/popularfront. This episode was sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee shop selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue, 97239. The episode's also sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA. One in South, one in West. Check them out on social media at Grindcore House. The episode is also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and informing people about historical conflict propaganda. Get your prints at propagandopolis.com and use the code POPULARFRONT10 for 10% off. Our new documentary, Ghosts of Karabakh, where we've been reporting from the front lines in Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, covering the very tense ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan. From the Armenian side, because we weren't allowed to go to Azerbaijan. It's an authoritarian country. You can only report how they want you to report, so we only did it from the Armenian side. We only could. So if you go to youtube.com/popularfront, that is out now. It's doing well. People are sharing it. Thank you all very much. Check it out. Have a look. Shout out to Johnny Pickup. He filmed all of that. Really, really good work. It's looking nice. So yeah, subscribe to us there, youtube.com/popularfront. Follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/popularfrontco. Instagram is at popular.front. The website is www.popularfront.co. You'll see everything there. If you want to follow me, it's at Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN on social medias. My website is jakehanrahan.com. Check out my work there if you like. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black. Listen to his music at samblackpf.com. Thank you very much to the high tier Patreons. They are A. Nickel, Manny, Travis Lieberman, Sky Alexander, Cherry, Ben Marshall, Dallas Dunn, Bandit 666, MJ, K Glitter Vulcan, Meredith Waters, Bethany Swoveland, C. O'Donnell, Adam H, Ryan Barbadillo, Damian Boyd, Larson 8669, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamond Steen, Jacob, Michael O'Connor, Taylor Kidd, Zach Packard, Todd Cravens, Alexander, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Ian Froese, James Cully, Michael Akakan, Ethan, Fitz Madrid, Joe Watt, Ed Coulthard, Johnny LaFleur, Clayton Taylor, Helen DeGenerate, Mike Barone, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Giorgio Arani, DR, Trey Nance, Amy R, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Nawaiz, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Moody Al Rashid, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, J.L., Sebastian, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarak, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorbanek, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Emily Molly, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, and Moritz Zumbwall. Thank you all very much. If you want to support us, go to patreon.com/popularfront, or if you prefer, popularfront.co/support.